Good afternoon and evening, if you so choose. Appreciate everyone coming out and listening to some poetry this afternoon, and privileged to be here with my fellow poets. So I'll get right to it. My most recent collection of poetry is Negro Asylum for the Lunatic Insane, and that was published through Main Street Rag out of Charlotte. And so, keeping with the title of the program, it is a hybrid type of book because it's both narrative and poetry. So to give a brief synopsis, it is a narrative about a World War II African-American veteran who eventually in his later years becomes a custodian at an all-Black psych ward, where he meets various individuals and patients, but one in particular named Brock Bridges is one who he sees and gains a lot of inspiration from. So you asked me, why are you writing about insane asylums? Probably a good question. I just had a fascination with one in particular called the South Carolina State Hospital on Bull Street in Columbia, which is where I live near now. And I just always had a fascination with that place because it was so secretive, and not many outsiders or the public knew a lot about it or what was going on there until after its doors closed. So that was just something that I gained inspiration from for this. And also coming out of the pandemic, just thinking about mental health, and especially African-American mental health, really gave me some inspiration. And also finally, people that I've known, I guess, my whole life who have experienced mental illness, and just that I would always have conversations with, and they would just somehow be gravitated towards me to want to talk, and I would do so. And so all of those things come to play, I guess, in this book. So I'll get busy with the reading. I'll start with a poem about Brock Bridges, or a few poems about Brock Bridges from the book. I'll start with one called Flowers. Can everyone hear me okay? It's great. Flowers. I don't think Brock Bridges ever slept. That's what Quan, working graveyard shift, thought too. When Brock wasn't escaping an orderly's eye into the courtyard, he was in his room thinking like that statue of a stone man with the fist under his chin, legs crossed, like he was at some high-class social tea with white ladies downtown. His eyes stayed open, Quan said. Some girl came by Calhoun one night to see Taggart, the orderly, knowing no company was supposed to be around, having some flowers picked up from the courtyard, waiting for her. I don't know what set Brock off when he walked by his room on her way with those flowers. He began squealing, flowers, flowers, through the hole in his closed door. So much that the girl stopped. She walked steady up to his door, jumped back when Brock raised his hand out, squealing, flowers, flowers. She took one, gave it to him. He said a polite, thank you, ma'am. He reached out to shake hands, and that old dog wouldn't let the child go, just sat there, squeezing the poor child's hand purple. She screamed and cried for Taggart. When he opened the door, Quan said, Brock took 50-11 bombs to the head. After he finally let go, he leaped like a damn panther, chomped down on Taggart's neck, and that was the end of Taggart. The same night, I came in to start at Calhoun. When I saw Brock in the morning, face beat to hell, he was thinking like the statue, chewing petals off that flower. So I should also mention the asylum is called Calhoun Negro Asylum for the Lunatic Insane, after John C. Calhoun. So there's a bit of historical element to this as well, positioning mental health in the state of South Carolina. Okay, this is called Shock Therapy. I remember fishing with my daddy for the first time off the side of a local bridge. bamboo pole in my hands felt like the power of a gun. Worm discharge on my fingers revealed a hook's sovereignty. Fish in our cooler passed heaves of air through their gills. Their blinking eyes roamed for answers to this riddle of life. Sometimes they flap on top of each other in the cooler, or when I couldn't quite catch one off my pole. Trap them with my hands on the muddy ground, scrambling to make sense of our madness, to uproot them from their place. How did we catch them in the current flowing so fast, rippling through my little boy eyes? Couldn't escape their hunger, I guess. The flow pushed them toward their fate, hauling them to our magnetic hooks. Brock Bridges lay on a medical bed. 2 nurses held him down, one at the head, one at the foot. Pushing my mop bucket past the cracked door, sometimes I saw him vibrating in bed. Electric current flowing through that black body under white sheets. Once I heard my daddy say, "Fish ain't got no memory, no past to go back to, only the now." I hope the same for Brock, his eyes wide, roaming for answers, body flapping, not to be caught. So there are like several different poems about patients in the asylum, and some of them I labeled by name. So I'm going to read a couple of those. This one is called Feeding at the Morgue. I waited outside the morgue with a body ready for tagging, a buzz soon to open the door. She hanged herself in her room after screaming some hours for another steroid. Doctors refused, saying she had one only a few hours before. Pain commented through her thin body and crashed midair when she dropped from the ceiling, plumed by the rail of her bed sheets, light years from the dead. A star-shot night glared at me for relief. I breathed her in to save her blood. Mine uncurdled thin to escape mosquitoes in the ever-dying dark. I blew a smoke plume at the uninvited buzz of one gorging on my guzzled arm. Stars live and die this way, sucking marrow and bone from us to survive, swelling from addiction to our blood, drinking us with flaming lips. How they glutton us to satiate their thigh-split hungers. All right, moving forward a little bit. So as I said, this is mostly narrative, but there are some like non-narrative pieces in there that I kind of like to stop through when I'm reading. So this one is called Clay Pit. Inspired by this, I guess this like, I guess we call it land that was across the street from where I used to live when I was a kid. And it was all this orange clay that was like undeveloped. And it was a place where my friends and I used to like ride our bicycles, you know, for lack of better things to do, I guess. Could have been worse. We could have been getting into trouble, but we decided to do that. So this is called Clay Pit, which is what we called it. A mouth of dust swallowed my bike, yet the wheels kept roaring on the buds of a red clay tongue. I was the eye of a windstorm, scrubbing wheel grips across tired cheeks of wildness. I have never been in a desert yet, but you might as well have pierced my flesh with cacti and scorched my tongue, parched from a Carolina kiss. Unlike many evil Knievel fathers of kids on bikes eating their dust, in the clay pit, rain did come back. I opened my mouth for a scream, coughed up an oasis. there will be beaches. We live on a graveyard arrowhead where the gullah battle haints and hags, and spirits of indigenous tribes hover to claim what is theirs. Yes, there will be time for beaches. And on one in Charleston, my people were buried and buried themselves and walked on the ocean until it became their bodies. Yes, those flags still droop here, and polished statues under them salute. Bones gather around their feet for the reenactments their sons crave. They kick the bones on their way to their sacrifice of burnt offerings, from praying hands rubbed over burning churches. Yes, come for the sunshine peeling your flesh. Stay for the smiles and hospitality, but don't forget the echo and chant of bones under your feet. So I'm gonna read a couple more. This is The Secret of Moss. All my times as a kid living in rural South Carolina, I never knew where moss came from. It was just this phenomenon in the trees, I guess. So decided to write about it. And it kind of fits in with the storyline of the book. The Secret of Moss. How a god survives in the unkempt mouths of nature's choir. Rain slides down the grizzle from his crying face at seeing black bodies hanging from his resting place. The last one we cut down belonged to Russell, who spit in a white man's face. He stuttered like a bad motor, always twisting his middle fingers without control of his nerves at the worst moment then. His family preacher tried to get him into the insane asylum, but before the paperwork got done, Klan stole Russell away in the night, hanged him on one of those oaks, face beat to hell, dressed him in his sleep gown. Moss curtained the body, a shroud like Lazarus shed. No, a robe to catch a spirit leaving a body, padding heaven's choir lofts for angels to sing in. Who can contain a sky full of Russells? Not the buckrers who hanged him. Neither will a god who would rather live on trees and weep lightning, too weak to strike white no more. All right, this will be my last poem. I appreciate you all being a wonderful audience. This is a sonnet called Psychology of Black Folk. So thank you very much. Called us four-legged beasts, wearing shackles as accessories when we really have wings, created for flits among petals, to leaps over treetops, voices for calling tribes to war, for summoning the dead in us, not for lowing and moaning, eating what our feet trample, chewing our cud until slaughter. We form ranks to carve our names in the skies, march the sky until we inhabit the gods we gave life. Thank you all.
Thank you, Len. It's an honor to read with you. And thank you guys for coming out, and also to the online Zoom audience. So I'm going to read poems from Heartbreak Tree, which is also a largely narrative kind of storytelling book, not completely, but to a large extent, sort of looking at various facets of both place and girlhood and womanhood through the lens of stories and through the lens of my own life, but also the lives of the generations of my family before me. So the poems I'm going to read today are actually each called Story. There's two different series of poems that or sequences that run throughout the collection, kind of spread out through different parts. One of them is called Letter to Myself 15. I'm not going to read those. The other is called Story. And they each use some sort of, or some snippet of a family story kind of as a seed for looking at some larger facet of life. So I won't read the title of each poem because you'll remember that it's Story. This is the first poem in the book. I don't mean to be ungrateful. I was bred for wanting more, the way a racehorse is bred for the wind scent. Those impossible legs like winged twigs that will snap in a high wind. What moves us onward is the same sometimes as what breaks us to the ground. Here's a story about my grandfather that I don't like to tell. How he found a World War II deserter's bundle tucked inside a cave. How he kept the money, then turned the guy in for a $15 reward. I'm not saying our people weren't hungry. We were always hungry. I'm not saying who my grandfather was is who I am. What my mother wanted was to be far away from where she started. What my father wanted was to begin again. I'm telling you, the hardest thing I ever had to do is to stop wanting what I already have. So when I read that poem a few days ago for, I don't know, like maybe the 20th time, I realized if you have a story you don't want to tell and you put it in a poem, it probably shouldn't be the first poem in the book because you're going to be telling it a whole lot. My mother said she never asked again who her oldest brother's father was. Granny didn't want to talk about it. That's all we needed to know. So I made stories in my head of someone kinder than my grandpa. His lips not folded thin inside a nighttime scruff of peppered gray. I wanted that comfort for her, if not in life, in memory of a silken tangle of flesh hidden between tall rows of corn back in Virginia where her people stayed. She never went back home. Not even after Grandpa died and finally she cut off her waist-length hair, let her daughter give her a home perm, soft curls around her neck. Years later, almost everybody dead, my aunt told me that old story. A widowed father stumbled drunk, grizzling himself into his daughter's bed. Her name was Etta. Before I knew her, 10 children had torn through that secret place her father had claimed. And this is a little lighter story, picking up again on my grandfather, my grandmother, but a little later, quite a bit later in life. When I was a kid and lived just a county or two up Kentucky Route 15 from that place my mother once called home, Granny would come from there and help Mom pick the beetles from her roses, tell her if she'd not got herself too fine to keep some chickens, there'd be no beetles there to pick. But we weren't the sort of family that circled back to what got left behind. And though it's true that home is what I always called whatever hill town my parents were in until they weren't, home got boxed up in a moving van from time to time, houses and towns discarded, snakeskin by the side of the road. So later, when my granny told me what she thought I already knew, that I didn't live up north, I only worked there, I set her straight. I will never move back home. And so home is another theme that really kind of runs through the book as well, looked at through different angles. But you only get that little bit of home in this reading. Have I ever told you my mother canceled her newspaper subscription when for the second time that ice-swathed winter delivery was delayed? I think about this while my husband labors to repair on my computer those things invisible I never knew I needed till they failed me. And how I wake at night, the chatter at the open window of my brain, she did, he said, they never will. My father held his grudges close. Poor substitute for love, his alcoholic father never turned his way. When hurt is all that's handed down, you learn to claim it. And so I see you, friend, inside the poem you sent me, kneeling in your spring damp garden, gloves on your quick hands. You pull leaves from last year's Lenten roses, looking for the middle way my family never found. To let it live, what's tender green inside. To let them go before they cut too deep, those jagged bits of what's already gone. Then moving back a little farther in time, another story. I never understood the story my mother liked to tell to company, how when Grandpa's daddy, Felix, died that thin night, October 31st, up on the mountain, the animals all threw a fit. The scream of mountain lions, wolves and bears howling whatever kind of clamor wolves and bears make. The next day, tracks led to his cabin door. My mother told it better. I was a town kid. What did I know of wild? She said he was a hunter, and I asked, were they happy he was dead? No, she said. They were showing him their honor. But why? My favorite question. I liked the story of how, when it was time for Deli, the least one, to marry, Felix sent word out and the men came, hats in hand. He had them toss those hats into the open fire, sent the girl home with the one whose didn't burn. Oh, that story I understood. Like in all the tales, woman is the prize for whatever man or beast outsmarts the king. My mother loved her grandpa more than I loved mine. He was the tallest in any picture, though we only had the one holding his Bible, his wife Rebecca in a flowered dress down to her ankles. She died. It was his replacement wife that narrowed Mom's eyes, the one who'd hid the peppermints when she'd call down the holler for the kids to come and do her chores after she got Deli out of the way. I'd been read that story too, the evil second queen. It wasn't till later that I learned to read myself and do some math. Deli was 13 when she was carried off to be somebody's bride. 13, the age that I was too, the first tracks to and from my door. And then the final story in the book, which is close to the end of the book, will be my second to last poem. And this one I go back even farther into time, as you will hear. And it is in some way sort of in conversation, I think, with the other stories, and especially the first poem in the book. What I'm saying is, we've been stitched to this place a long time, and this place has always been complicated. Frayed seams are mended, ripped again. The stories I tell you now, embroidered patches, other lives to mine. So here I sit, trying to piece a poem from my maternal line, a row of names like the begats. Ebessine carried Elizabeth, carried Eveline, carried Sarah, carried Etta, carried Larney, carried me. Because we all know that most of what gets written is his story. Even their names uncarved, as on the stone that does not mark my father's mother's grave, beneath rough grass and bramble at the cemetery's edge. Pauline. But right there on the internet is my first New World grandmother, Margaret Dawson, Jamestown, 1621. It doesn't get more American than that, with the plundering and the massacres, the first Africans enslaved. At 24 or 25, she left England as a good and faithful servant, a mail order bride before there was mail, to be wed for a price of 150 pounds of tobacco leaves. Her journey not made change in the belly of the great white wooden Warwick like those others erased. My DNA traces Cameroon, Congo, the southern Bantu. I have no claim to those I carry. Margaret outlived 3 husbands and left to my many great-grandfather two households with all movables and unmovables, including 1 yearling and heifer, 1 Negro woman, and all their increase to be his and his heirs forever. 9 generations later, Leslie County, Kentucky, Nancy Lewis in her Civil War widow appeal was down to 1 cow, 2 hogs, borrowed a mule to plow. At least nobody owned anyone anymore. My mother, when she died, owned the family graveyard, though she had lost the deed and made us promise not to plant her there. What I'm saying? I come from what's sown too deep in the seams to be picked out clean. And the final poem is a poem in honor of Poetry Month, which I have to find because it's not a story poem. And it is a poem, and so in honor of Poetry Month, it is a poem about poetry. And nope, it's not. It's right there. But thank you. So maybe it's true. Poetry doesn't make you a better person. And the news that can be found there is like some gone week Sunday Times, tossed in its clear green wrapper beneath the neighbor's car, the one who died. And no one came to find him. And you didn't knock on his door when his trash can of carry-out chickens and ribs set spilling its own kind of news. Maybe. But oh, to live a while as marrow in someone else's bones, to breathe her breath upon the mirror held up to your life. Doesn't it make you want to fling open whatever door you come to? Doesn't it make you want to try? So thanks for trying.
Just having this so I don't go on forever, which you wouldn't want to happen. I'm going to read most of the poems I'm going to read. I'm Denver, by the way. Most of the poems I'm going to read are from my new book, The Scarecrow Alibis, but which all center around a scarecrow or the notion of scarecrows. I'll tell a little more about that later, but I've been reading a lot of these poems lately, and I was thinking that maybe people think that's all I think about are scarecrows. So I thought I'd do a Netflix or HBO thing and say previously in my brain, and read you a couple poems from before the Scarecrow poems. This is called Proposal to End the Monotony. I propose that we say goodbye just to get it over with the moment we first meet. I propose that we begin weeping at the beginnings of all things just to acknowledge their inevitable ends. I propose that we throw rice at the dead when they are carried out of the cathedrals and bury the bride and groom in the cemetery immediately after they kiss. I propose that we allow our cities to sink instead of trying to prop them back up again, and that we turn into fish and swim instead of running to the hills looking over our shoulders at what was and what could have been by the sea. And I propose that we make love right away and then spend the rest of our time together seducing each other unapologetically, with no memory of the mistakes our bodies have already made with each other and with others in the dark. This is still previously in my brain. This is a very famous restaurant. A man who believes his kitchen is the kitchen of a very famous restaurant has just gotten an order for something he hasn't made in decades. He peeks into the dining room to see which customer has ordered it and realizes that it is his wife again. sitting with her napkin folded on her lap and wearing a dress he bought for her before they were suddenly not young anymore. She knows that this is one of the finest restaurants around and is sitting with the posture of one in such a place. The man shouts to his sous chef to slice the garlic, no thicker than a baby's pinky nail, and then stands where a sous chef would stand and starts slicing. The radio is playing Mexican music, which is what the dishwashers would want if he had dishwashers, but he doesn't, so he plays the Mexican music for himself and pretends he knows all the words and pretends they break his heart. If he had a waiter right now, he would send him out with his wife's favorite falanghina or vernaccia di San Gimignano, but he doesn't have a waiter, so he sends himself out. I'm sorry, madam, he says, bending at the waist. We're rather short-staffed this evening. I do hope you'll forgive us, and pours her a glass. And the man who believes his kitchen is the kitchen of a very famous restaurant waits a moment looking into his wife's eyes. And she looks up at him with those eyes, which are the eyes of someone who has heard about this very famous restaurant and who is here finally after all these years, somehow lucky enough to come on a night when she is privileged to be served by the famous chef himself. Okay, so the Scarecrow Alibis came out in October, and it actually one of the early poems from this book, which I'll read, was chosen for the William Matthews Poetry Prize here from the Asheville Poetry Review. But it was the very beginning of the pandemic, so I didn't get to come down and do a reading then when it came out. But the Scarecrow came to me on the roof of we had moved to a new apartment, and my daughter, who was like 4 at the time or 5, had taken over my writing studio. And so I had no writing studio, so I was writing on the roof. And I was trying to get away from the poems that I had been writing, like things like A Guy Who Pretends His Kitchen's a Restaurant. And I just started writing this thing about a scarecrow. And coincidentally, at the same time that I was working on these poems, I thought it was the first one was the only one I was ever going to write, and they just kept coming. They're still coming. But at the same time I was writing these things, a young actor who was dating a woman downstairs was coming up at this when I was writing, and he would stick his head out and say, "I'm sorry, am I bothering you?" And I said, "No." And then he would go work out on the other side of the roof, and it turned out to be Chadwick Boseman, who became a very famous actor, as you probably all know. But he would work out on one side of the roof, getting ready to play, I think, Jackie Robinson, but I'm not sure which role. He was unknown at the time, and I'd be writing these scarecrow poems. So I partially dedicated this book to him. This is part of the first poem, which actually runs through the entire book, but it's just in pieces. And this is the first part of that. A scarecrow is trying to start the old motorcycle that the farmer hasn't used in decades. It's not yet dawn, and the scarecrow has found a gas can with a little gas left in it. And he's pumping air into the tires that haven't had air in them since before the farmer and his wife had kids. And now the farmer's kids have kids of their own. The scarecrow pulls some straw out from under his collar and stuffs it through the cracks in the old leather seat and oils the parts with the oil can the farmer uses for his tractor and tools. And then the scarecrow tries again to start the motorcycle with these old stuffed pants he calls his legs and these old stuffed shoes he calls his feet, stomping down and stomping down again on the Kickstarter in the otherwise silent barn. So throughout the book, the scarecrow's trying to get this motorcycle started. This is called If the Scarecrow Weren't a Scarecrow. Sorry, I flew down from New York today and the air in the plane wasn't so great, so my normally gravelly voice sounds even worse. If the scarecrow weren't a scarecrow, he might be a strolling violinist who appears at your table and waits for you to fall in love with your wife again, or to wave him off with a dollar bill. Or he might be a ship's captain standing on the bow of his ship, looking out across the water, looking toward a place he once thought of as home. The scarecrow might be a glass of water in a thirsty man's hand, or a set of keys to an ex-lover's apartment, keys you don't know if you'll ever have the emotional strength to remove from the hook inside your door. If the scarecrow weren't a scarecrow. He might know a lot about oceans or how to swim across oceans. He might be a little boy running up to the waves and then away, up to the waves and then away if the scarecrow weren't a scarecrow. He might pass the scarecrow from a car on some back road and barely notice the scarecrow out there, looking almost like a falling down man. Or if he does notice, he might wonder for a moment what it must be like to stand that still and then switch the radio station and start singing along, having completely forgotten about that scarecrow back there before the chorus, before more than a couple miles have even gone by, if the scarecrow weren't a scarecrow. If the scarecrow weren't a scarecrow, he might be you, or he might be me, or he might just be someone else who is neither you nor me. Someone perhaps who doesn't even know that he or she is not a scarecrow and never was one, perhaps at all, who does not feel the pang of not being who he or she might have been, as you and I and the scarecrow himself feel such a pang every time we consider how things and we might have been different. So also running through this book are these, these, I lost my timer, sorry. The idea of a murder of crows, an unkindness of ravens, which is a great one, an unkindness of raven. I thought, what would be a group? What would a group of scarecrows be called? So running through this book are these attempts to figure out what a group of scarecrows would be called. Here are a couple of them: a purgatory of scarecrows, an amnesia of scarecrows, a somnolence of scarecrows, a satchel of scarecrows, a triage of scarecrows, a scribble of scarecrows, a grieving of scarecrows. This is the poem that Ilya Kaminsky chose for the William Matthews Prize study guide. I also, it gets weird. This is why I had to do the previously thing, because it sounds like I'm locked in this crazy world. But I figured out that nobody was going to understand these poems so much, so I decided to do study guides to the book of scarecrows. But then they got away from me a little bit. So this is study guide 1. A scarecrow's remains are called remnants. There are no autopsies for scarecrows unless the coroner happens to be a crow. The most common musical instrument in dreams about scarecrows is the accordion. Despite all you have heard to the contrary, scarecrows are not bitter about their lot in life. In fact, among the inanimate, scarecrows consistently rank higher in happiness than mannequins, effigies, and statues. Among the titles most often used for scarecrows are Archbishop of Silence, Brigadier General of Stillness, and His Highness Earl of Regret. In French, scarecrow is l'épouvantail, in Italian, spaventapasseri, and in Albanian, it is gogol. A group of scarecrows together in a field is called a purgatory of scarecrows. If scarecrows are scattered, they are referred to as an ovation of scarecrows, an occasion of scarecrows. When the wind stops suddenly, all the scarecrows are holding their breath all at once. A group of scarecrows holding their breath all at once is called a calm of scarecrows. If you are hitchhiking and a car pulls over to the side of the road to pick you up and its driver is a scarecrow, it is in your best interest to say that you did not intend to be hitchhiking and would rather walk. The most common cause of death among scarecrows is cardiac arrest, which has the medical community baffled because scarecrows do not appear to have hearts. When the poet's mother died, the poet walked out into the grass and stood still. He just realized that this is when he most likely became a scarecrow. As we all know, there are highways and there are simple roads, but the scarecrow does not seem to differentiate between the two in his dreams. Scarecrows are among the lucky who can drink coffee well into the night and still manage to sleep when it is time to sleep. A group of scarecrows unable to sleep for some reason unrelated to coffee is called an insomnia of scarecrows. The most often cited reason for insomnia among scarecrows is a certain memory of someone the scarecrow once loved, who disappeared one day and was found much later as only skin and bones. A scarecrow's entrails are called road maps. A scarecrow's daydreams are called daydreams. I don't know how to do it. Oh, I got a couple more minutes. Okay. I'm going to skip ahead to near the end of this book. Charades. Nobody is better at the old parlor game charades than the scarecrow. You should have seen him do Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. And somehow he got his partner to guess cheese grater within seconds. Nobody is really sure how he does it. He's so good that the other players have drifted away from the parlor because it ceases to be a novelty when you're simply getting beaten again and again. It's almost not even a game to him, one of the guests said. It's like war or something. And then they go on with their party, drinking and laughing in the kitchen, with the scarecrow still back there, alone again now, squinting at the little slip of paper, and then acting out scarecrow for himself in the mirror. So one thing that happens in the book is that the scarecrow, if the scarecrow actually exists, because it's unclear, is in love with, or thinks he's falling in love with, the farmer's wife, and he spends a lot of time watching her. And now I lost the poem. I'm going to do another one of these Unkindness of Ravens ones, and I'll get to that. A firing squad of scarecrows, a spaghetti western of scarecrows, an arpeggio of scarecrows, a what she looks like with her eyes closed of scarecrows, a hopscotch of scarecrows, an etiquette of scarecrows, a confession of scarecrows, a marginalia of scarecrows, a Giacometti of scarecrows, a lullaby of scarecrows, a September of scarecrows, a straitjacket of scarecrows, a Thelonious Monk of scarecrows, a hush of scarecrows, a sacristy of scarecrows, a yesterday of scarecrows, an anonymity of scarecrows, an embalming of scarecrows, a tagging along of scarecrows. And when the farmer and his wife wake up after the bathroom light and the kitchen light and the dishes, after the coffee, the farmer's wife will come to the door to see what might have spooked the stupid old dog. And she will look out across the fields and she will see that everything is the same. She will not even know that the old motorcycle in the barn is exactly in the same place as it always was. And all the scarecrow will dare let himself think about through morning and into the afternoon, even after the sun has risen high and the crows have disappeared into the shade and the old dog is settled into sleep next to the cool dark of the spring house, is that motorcycle and its promise of everywhere and far away. Okay. One more poem from this book, and that's one final poem. So throughout the book, the scarecrow is watching the farmer's wife and thinking that sometimes she waves to him, or maybe she's just pushing her hair back. He doesn't know for sure. But he has this dream. He would somehow fall backwards, the scarecrow, from his stake and manage somehow to land perfectly in the sheet she had just pulled off the line, the farmer's wife, and was about to fold. And when she would fold one end over the other end, one corner to meet the other corner in a silent kiss, he would be wrapped in the sheet, the scarecrow, like a baby swaddled, or more accurately, like a butterfly about to unfurl itself from its cocoon. And then she would be unhappy with her folding, and she would open the sheet back up, the farmer's wife, and hold two corners and snap out the sheet with a whoosh, like a parachute opening, launching him into flight. And he would be so light up there, the scarecrow, weightless as the breath of a dandelion or a faraway puff of starlings. And he would watch her face from up there as if she, the farmer's wife, were seeing a miracle somehow, unloosed by her fingers and somehow untied to this farm. And she would be partially shrouded by the white sheet for an instant, partially hidden by the cocoon, his fallen parachute, as he, this bird or butterfly, flew above her. And she, this woman, Evelyn perhaps, would not look so weary then, and she would not look so sad then, as he, the scarecrow, for that one tiny moment, took flight. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much, poets, for being here today. It's been a pleasure to listen to you and to get a chance to hear your readings. We want to encourage you all to go to the registers at your convenience and check out the poetry that's available from our great poets today. Thank you for joining us, live audience. Thank you for joining us, virtual audience, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Happy National Poetry Month. Thank you.